December 12th, 1944. 21:40 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits alone in his second-floor office, cigarette burning in the ashtray, reading the latest G2 intelligence summary from interrogated German prisoners. His eyes stop on one line. All panzer reserves positioned against Patton's probable axis of advance. Montgomery's front considered secondary threat. He reads it again, then a third time. The Supreme Commander of Allied forces leans back in his chair, removes his reading glasses, and stares at the ceiling. 4.5 million men under his command. 1,000-mile front. And the enemy's entire strategic calculation rests not on where the Allies are strongest, but on fear of one unpredictable American general. Eisenhower stubs out his cigarette, picks up the phone, and calls for his chief of staff. In the conversation that follows, quiet, tense, devastating, he will admit something that reshapes the final 6 months of the war. What Eisenhower said in that room would expose a truth the Allied public was never supposed to hear. That Germany's best generals feared George Patton more than the man leading twice his forces. The office is dimly lit, maps covering every wall, ashtrays overflowing on the mahogany desk. Eisenhower commands millions, but his greatest battle isn't against the Wehrmacht. It's managing Bernard Montgomery and George Patton. Two generals who despise each other and compete for every gallon of fuel, every supply truck, every moment of his attention. Outside his window, December fog blankets the palace gardens. Inside, the maps tell competing stories. Montgomery's blue arrows in the north show Operation Market Garden stalled in Dutch mud. Patton's arrows in Lorraine push forward despite being denied the fuel he screams for daily. Churchill cables constantly, pressuring Eisenhower to favor British commanders. American newspapers demand Patton get priority. The political mathematics exhausts him more than the military kind. He needs both men. Montgomery for methodical planning, for the careful set-piece battles that minimize casualties and satisfy London. Patton for momentum, for the aggressive exploitation that keeps Germans off balance and satisfies Washington. But the friction between them drains energy from every strategic decision, complicates every conference, poisons every command meeting with unspoken rivalry. Eisenhower lights another cigarette, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. The stress shows in the lines around his eyes, the curt tone of his recent memos, the chain smoking that never stops. But something else troubles him tonight. A pattern emerging in the intelligence reports that doesn't match the command structure he's built. And patterns, in war, matter more than plans. Since El Alamein in 1942, Montgomery has worn invincibility like the 2 badges on his beret. The careful planner who never loses. The master of the set-piece battle who defeated Rommel in the desert and dictates terms to war correspondents about the scientific approach to warfare. Eisenhower initially defers to this reputation. After D-Day, he assigns Montgomery the main northern thrust toward the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany, and provides the bulk of Allied logistics to support it. In staff meetings at SHAEF headquarters, British liaison officers present Montgomery's operational plans with reverence, emphasizing his methodical brilliance, his refusal to attack until conditions are perfect. The fluorescent lights hum overhead during these briefings. Maps show Montgomery's blue arrows promising steady, unstoppable progress. Fuel allocations favor 21st Army Group. Supply priorities go north. Eisenhower approves it all, trusting the mythology that conquered North Africa, that broke through Normandy, that promised to end the war by Christmas. But in the back of his mind, quiet doubts accumulate. Market Garden failed spectacularly in September. Antwerp took weeks longer to clear than promised. The northern advance moves with a caution that feels more bureaucratic than strategic. Eisenhower says nothing publicly. Questioning Montgomery means angering Churchill, destabilizing Allied unity, creating political firestorms he cannot afford. Yet the dissonance grows, fed by numbers that don't quite add up, and intelligence reports that tell a different story than the one he's been believing. By late November, the G2 intelligence section at Versailles begins compiling reports that don't fit Allied assumptions. Ultra decrypts, those precious intercepts of German military communications, reveal Wehrmacht field commanders obsessed with Patton's probable breakthrough sector and Third Army deception operations. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. German situation reports refer to Patton even when he holds a smaller front with fewer divisions than Montgomery. Colonel Benjamin Monk Dixon, Patton's own intelligence chief, sends summaries to SHAEF noting that captured German maps mark Third Army positions with red danger zone annotations, while Montgomery's entire army group receives standard defensive markings. Eisenhower reads these reports at his desk after midnight, coffee gone cold in the cup. The fluorescent light flickers. He adjusts his reading glasses, circles phrases in red pen, underlines Patton 3 times. Wehrmacht Panzer Reserves, the mobile armored fist that can decide battles, consistently position themselves opposite Patton's front, not Montgomery's. The intelligence analysts present it as curiosity, not conclusion. But Eisenhower sees what they're documenting. The enemy's fear. Not respect, not caution. Fear. The kind that makes you hold back your best troops. That makes you refuse to commit reserves elsewhere because you're certain Patton will exploit any weakness the moment you turn your back. He sets the file aside, not ready yet to question the mythology he's invested months defending, but unable to ignore the data accumulating with every new intercept. December 10th, 1944. An interrogation facility behind Allied lines. A captured Oberst from the 5th Panzer Army sits across from American intelligence officers and provides an admission that stops the room cold. We know Montgomery will come. We can prepare defenses, calculate his buildup, position our forces. Patton, we never know where Patton will strike, so we must hold everything in reserve. The transcript reaches Eisenhower's desk that evening, stamped confidential in red ink. A handwritten note from Bedell Smith paperclipped to the front. This matches 17 other interrogation summaries since October. Eisenhower reads it once, then again. The winter cold seeps through the palace walls as the weight of the revelation settles over him. That same week, German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's operational orders are intercepted. The language is explicit, almost desperate. All available armor must remain mobile to counter Patton's exploitation operations. Montgomery's front can be held with fixed defenses and static infantry divisions. Eisenhower stands at his office window after midnight, hands clasped behind his back. Snow falls on the palace courtyard, silent, steady, indifferent. The illusion he's maintained for months dissolves in that silence. Not that Montgomery is incompetent, but that the enemy doesn't fear him the way they fear Patton. The Germans respect Montgomery enough to build defenses. They fear Patton enough to refuse committing reserves anywhere else. And Eisenhower has been allocating resources based on Allied mythology rather than enemy psychology. December 11th. Eisenhower orders his operations staff to compile comprehensive analysis. Where are German panzer and mechanized divisions actually positioned along the Western Front? The order is quiet, almost casual. but everyone in the room understands what's being asked. The resulting maps, laid out on the massive table in the SHAEF war room, tell an undeniable story. Against Montgomery's 21st Army Group, 33 full divisions, overwhelming logistics, clear priority. The Wehrmacht positions 6 panzer divisions in static, prepared defenses. Against Patton's Third Army, 12 divisions, constantly fuel-starved, operating as a supporting effort. 11 panzer divisions, plus all mobile reserves within 48 hours striking distance. The mathematical disparity stuns the room into silence. Patton faces nearly double the armored opposition with a third of Montgomery's strength. Yet Third Army still advances faster, penetrates deeper, keeps the enemy more off balance than the main effort in the north. Eisenhower traces the red enemy unit markers with his finger. Each one represents thousands of German soldiers, hundreds of tanks, entire formations positioned not where Allied strength is greatest, but where German fear is greatest. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows across Europe. The numbers scream what the mythology has been hiding for months. In that moment, standing among his silent staff in the war room, Eisenhower realizes he's been fighting the wrong war. He's been allocating resources to satisfy Allied politics and command structure while the enemy allocates resources based on psychology and terror. And in war, the enemy's decisions matter more than your plans. 21:40 hours, room 24, second floor, away from the operations center. Eisenhower summons General Walter Bedell Smith, his chief of staff, his confessor, the only man who can hear the truth without it leaking to Churchill or Marshall or the press. Smith enters to find Eisenhower standing at the window, hands in pockets, staring at nothing. The room is cold. A single desk lamp provides the only light. Without turning, Eisenhower says, "Beadle, I need you to tell me the truth. When you read those German intercepts, what do you actually see?" Smith hesitates. Then, "They're positioning for Patton, sir. They've been positioning for Patton since September." Eisenhower turns. His face is drawn, exhausted. Cigarette ash spills onto the carpet. They're not afraid of Monty. They respect him. They plan for him. But they're not afraid of him. Patton, they're terrified he'll do something they can't predict, can't contain, can't stop once it starts. The words hang in the room like gun smoke after a firing. Smith nods slowly. "That's what the data says, sir." Eisenhower walks to his desk, picks up the intelligence file with both hands. His voice drops to barely above a whisper. "Then Patton's worth more to us scaring them than Montgomery is beating them. And I've been running this war backwards." He sets the file down, looks at Smith. The weight of 6 months of misallocated resources, of political compromises, of mythology over mathematics, settles between them like a third presence in the room. Outside, the palace clock tower chimes 10 times, marking the moment when Allied command philosophy shifts from mythology to psychology, from politics to enemy perception, from what makes Churchill happy to what makes German generals lose sleep. In the 48 hours following that conversation, Eisenhower's decisions shift in ways only his inner staff notices. He drafts a carefully worded memo to General Marshall in Washington explaining that Third Army's aggressive operational posture creates disproportionate German defensive commitments that should be exploited as psychological leverage. He quietly redirects fuel allocations, not dramatically, that would trigger political firestorms, but enough that Patton's staff notices increased supply flow starting December 13th. When Montgomery requests priority for his next northern offensive, Eisenhower's response is measured, almost cautious, asking for revised timelines and questioning whether German reserves are actually committing to that sector. Around SHAEF headquarters, senior staff noticed the change in tone during briefings. Less automatic deference to Montgomery's methodical plans. More questions about where German strength is concentrating versus where Allied politics demands action. Bedell Smith begins framing operational discussions around enemy force disposition rather than Allied offensive priorities, subtly reorienting the command group's thinking without explicitly overturning established command relationships. The overhead fluorescents in the operations centers seem brighter now, casting fewer shadows across the maps, as if someone finally turned on all the lights and saw what was actually there, instead of what everyone assumed should be there. But Eisenhower says nothing publicly. Admitting Patton's psychological value would inflame the Montgomery-Patton rivalry, infuriate Churchill, create headlines questioning Allied unity at the moment unity matters most. So the shift remains quiet, internal, visible only in fuel tonnages and operational approvals that subtly change without formal announcements. Yet everyone close to the Supreme Commander feels it, the mythology cracking, replaced by something harder and more ruthless. In a classified assessment Eisenhower drafts for his personal files, never circulated, never discussed in meetings, he articulates why Patton generates more German fear than Montgomery commands German respect. The analysis is clinical, almost cold, stripping away personality and focusing purely on operational psychology. Montgomery telegraphs his intentions weeks in advance through massive supply buildups, methodical preparations, and public statements about not attacking until conditions are perfect. German intelligence tracks every supply convoy, calculates the buildup schedule, and prepares layered defenses accordingly. Wehrmacht commanders can read Montgomery like sheet music. Predictable tempo, known rhythm, prepared crescendos. Patton operates on improvisation and exploitation. He strikes before enemy forces consolidate. He changes objectives mid-operation based on opportunity rather than plan. He pushes exhausted units beyond what German staff officers, trained in Prussian military doctrine, consider tactically sustainable. His logistics are perpetually inadequate by textbook standards. Yet he advances anyway, living off captured supplies and accepting risks that violate every principle of conventional warfare. Wehrmacht commanders cannot compute this. They're trained to calculate logistics ratios, defensive frontages, reserve positioning based on predictable enemy behavior. Patton's behavior isn't predictable. It's instinctive, opportunistic, willing to gamble on chaos. Captured documents reveal German units opposite Third Army received standing orders to maintain mobile reserves at all times and prepare for exploitation in any direction, effectively pinning down entire divisions that could reinforce other sectors. In his private notes, locked in the safe in room 24, Eisenhower writes one line that captures everything. Patton's value isn't in the ground he takes. It's in the ground the Germans won't leave because they're afraid he'll take it. The page sits in darkness, too politically sensitive to share, too strategically important to ignore. 4 days after Eisenhower's realization, the Germans launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. On December 16th, Wehrmacht armored spearheads smashed through American lines in Belgium, creating chaos, threatening to split the Allied front, gambling everything on speed and shock. But Eisenhower's new understanding proves critical. While other commanders scramble to understand the German objective, Eisenhower immediately orders Patton to disengage Third Army from the Saar offensive, wheel 90 degrees north, and strike the German southern flank. It's an audacious maneuver, redeploying an entire army over 100 miles in winter conditions, attacking into a fluid battle with minimal preparation. Patton accomplishes it in 48 hours. German planners assumed it would take a week minimum, time enough to consolidate their gains and prepare defenses. Instead, Third Army hits the southern shoulder of the Bulge on December 22nd, 6 days after the offensive began, catching Wehrmacht forces still extended and vulnerable. German commanders panic. Intercepted communications show Rundstedt screaming for reserves to block Patton's breakthrough sector, even though Montgomery's larger forces in the north are closer to the critical German supply lines at St. Vith. The entire southern shoulder collapses not because Patton's divisions are larger or better equipped, but because the Germans commit disproportionate strength trying to contain him. Reserves they desperately need elsewhere. In the SHAEF war room, watching blue pins advance where German panic creates opportunity, Eisenhower sees his December 12th insight validated in real time. He doesn't gloat, doesn't explain to his staff why he knew Patton's movement would trigger German overreaction beyond rational calculation. He simply smokes his cigarette, studies the map, and makes a mental note that psychological warfare shapes operational reality more than any logistics chart could ever predict. Through the winter and spring of 1945, Eisenhower leverages Patton's psychological impact with increasing sophistication. He allows Third Army to make ostentatious preparations for Rhine crossings that draw German reserves south, then executes Montgomery's actual crossing at Wesel with significantly reduced opposition. He uses Third Army reconnaissance as strategic bait, pushing aggressive patrols forward in sectors where he wants Germans to commit strength, effectively turning Patton into a mobile deception asset. The Wehrmacht, conditioned by months of fearing Patton's exploitation operations, falls for it repeatedly, shifting reserves to block west Patton's probable axis of advance, while Hodge's First Army or Patch's Seventh Army advance through weakened sectors elsewhere. By April, German situation maps captured in collapsed headquarters show Patton's positions circled in red ink, annotated with Hauptgefahr, main threat, even when Third Army operates as a supporting effort rather than the main attack. The German obsession with Patton has become strategic paralysis, forcing them to maintain mobile reserves against contingencies rather than committing forces where battles are actually being fought. Eisenhower never publicly explains this dynamic. After the war, military historians credit Montgomery's Rhine crossing at Wesel, the Ruhr encirclement, the methodical campaigns that fit conventional military theory. Patton's role as strategic scarecrow, the general whose reputation pinned down German reserves more effectively than actual combat, remains buried in classified intelligence files. In his private memoirs, years later, Eisenhower writes one cryptic line about the dynamic. Sometimes the greatest contribution a commander makes is not what he captures, but what he forces the enemy to defend. The palace lights at Versailles go dark in May 1945, and with them, the secret of how psychological warfare shaped the final campaign more than firepower, logistics, or any battle plan Eisenhower's staff ever drafted. Decades pass. Historians celebrate Montgomery as the master planner, cautious, methodical, the general who never lost. They portray Patton as the aggressive cowboy, brilliant but reckless, effective but undisciplined. The intelligence files showing which general the enemy actually feared remain locked in military archives, declassified only after everyone involved is dead. Eisenhower took the secret to his grave in 1969, never publicly admitting that German psychology shaped his command decisions as profoundly as Allied strength. To do so would diminish Montgomery, anger Britain, complicate the clean narrative of Allied unity that served post-war politics better than uncomfortable truths about fear and perception. But the pattern remains undeniable in those dusty files. Wehrmacht commanders positioned their best divisions against Patton, redirected reserves to block his probable breakthroughs, and sacrificed operational flexibility because they couldn't stop imagining what he might do next. The lesson Eisenhower learned that December night in Room 24, that enemy perception matters more than friendly strength, that fear is as decisive as firepower, that the mythology you create in the enemy's mind can win battles you never have to fight, never made it into command manuals or staff college curricula. The war ended with parades and medals. Montgomery was knighted. Patton died in a Jeep accident 9 months after Germany surrendered. Eisenhower became president on a record that never mentioned how he weaponized one general's reputation against the enemy's nerve. In the end, the most effective strategy remained the least discussed, buried beneath decades of public mythology that served political purposes better than historical accuracy. Sometimes, the truth costs more than wars.